right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to another edition of Spring Office Hours. I'm your host, Dan Vega. With me, as always, is my good friend, DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how are you doing?
I'm good. We're having a good day. It's a good week. The weather's hanging in there in Kansas City. And yeah, I just got done with a wonderful session with a couple of good friends, and I have so much to learn. So I have a bunch of things on my backlog, and I'm starting to treat it like a backlog. These are things I want to learn, and it's all exciting. Like there's fun stuff ahead for me.
You have to treat it like a backlog because there's so much to learn, and you have to like somehow prioritize things. So speaking of the weather, one of my favorite days of the year is coming up, which is on Sunday. We spring ahead, we turn the clocks forward, spring forward. We're almost out of the dog days of winter. I'm not a fan of winter. I don't mind the snow. I'm just not a fan of winter. I like to be outside, and I like to get the kids outside, and it's really hard to do so when it's minus 10 degrees. So
I totally get it.
Looking forward to a little bit of a change there and being able to get back outside and run. I miss running outside. I'm not like you. I cannot run in cold weather. I don't know what it is. I run on the treadmill. I wait for the warm weather. I come out of hibernation and then I start running once it's warm. So,
hello.
So
let us know where you're from when you're. Join us in the chat. Let us know where you're from.
We have a lot to get to today. The kind of theme for today is Spring Boot 3.0.4. We had a new release last week that is based on, Spring Framework 6.0.6. So we have some things to talk about in there. One of which was a big kind of bug that came out. It was a regression that came out of one of those versions that seemed to be making the rounds last week. So we'll talk about that, see if that's affecting you. And if it is, maybe you'll know why now. So we'll talk about that. We'll take a look at kind of what was fixed or what was released in those features or in those releases. But we'll also just kind of use that as a jumping off point for kind of question and answers. So as always, please go ahead and ask your questions in the chat, and we'll go ahead and get to those as we can. So what else? What have you been up to?
I sent out a bunch of stickers today.
Nice.
So that's what's going on. Stickers at springofficehours.io. Email your address to stickers@springofficehours.io, and we'll get them to you just as fast as possible.
I'm interested in the production of how those get sent out. So maybe we'll talk about that one day.
Deal.
Yeah. So I've just been doing a lot. I know you've noticed because you were asking me about it, but I've been doing some more live streaming lately, just some like coding, because at least on this show, we have a very kind of structured format. We have things we want to talk about. We answer questions. We don't do as much live coding as we used to, or we do on other shows. So I wanted a way to just kind of get on there and start like coding because it helps me. And coming back to the dog days of winter, I don't know about you, but like I get real bored around here, like lonely down in the basement. I'm shoved into the dungeon down here. I'm trapped down here during the day. And it's just nice to like talk to people like Thomas, and Simon and Pad, who are always show up to all of our streams, which I'm very, very thankful for. So I've been having fun with that and just, I don't know, playing a lot more on the front end. So I've been doing some fun things on the front end, building a blog from Notion. So using the Notion API, which is not the greatest API in the world. I won't say the greatest API. I'm saying that Notion can do so many things that they've broken down their structure of like pages into like so many objects. So if you want to like get data from a page and reconstruct a page, it's not an easy task.
Here's something. I watched Marco Code's session last week on Spring Developer. That was a great talk. My question coming from his session, does discussing Tomcat versus Jetty versus Undertow make sense in 2023? Your thoughts?
I don't know. I didn't get a chance I caught like the beginning of Marco's session, and then I think I was still sick. So I think I like bounced. I had to go somewhere else. So I'll have to catch that and see kind of what his talk was about. But yeah, Tomcat versus Jetty. I don't have a ton of experience with Undertow, but I mean, again, all of the kind of implementations have different features. So it's a matter of looking at those features and seeing if that's something that you need for your application. Most of the things I build, in the last few years have all used Tomcat. If you're using like reactive web, you're using Jetty. So yeah, that matters. But I don't know specifically if like what you're trying to compare that. So again, depends on what features you're looking for and what some of those implementations do.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I've been watching your content. I've been watching Josh Long's content, and it's great. The thing that I like about the live streaming is the flow of consciousness. You're going from one thing to the next, and I watch. I was saying it earlier. I watch your shows as just I put it passive. I put it on the background. I put it on the other screen, and I'm listening. And that part of being in the basement and alone, I've got my buddies on the screen. So you're definitely getting views. And sometimes I watch the same episode more than once, but I appreciate the live streams. And if anybody out there is like me, I think they appreciate it too. Like that was it has been a part of the way I develop now that I'm working from home, is having those friendly voices, those developer concerns, hearing people think out loud about things that they're going through. It might not be relevant today, but it might catch. And it's nice to, I heard Dan talk about that the other day.
Yeah. And I threw out a tweet the one day and I was like, I'm live streaming or live coding in particular, just so everybody knows I have no idea what I'm doing too. Like when you start live coding, you realize like, wow, like, there are some things that I'm just not used to doing that I need to like talk through as I'm building these things out. So, people see videos and presentations and forget like these things are very scripted. Like it takes a long time to like put that together, like what I'm going to put into a video. Like I don't just get on video and like build something. Like I practice it. I take time like understanding what I'm trying to build.
That's where I'm making my mistake. I don't
yeah. So I put a ton of work into like learning something before I do a video. And when I'm live coding, it's like, all right, let's just get on air and make mistakes. And this is what everybody does, in their day-to-day jobs. So
we have a good question right away. And I'd say at least 75% of this show, there's a question around JPA. This is following suit. JPA question: how should you list an entity relationship when you have a reused object, i.e., user has relationship to object address twice, a work address and a home address?
I'm not sure. Would you use that like an embedded object there? So I've used address as like an embedded object before. What do you mean when you have a reused object? Oh, okay. So you have an address.
Should that be a one-to-many or one-to-one? Like, I think that Paul's asking, like, hey, should I have a table for work addresses and a table for home addresses? Or should I have a table that has addresses, one is a type work and one is a type of home?
I would think the latter. I think the latter makes sense. Again, there's no context of what you're doing in your application, so it's a little hard for me to say.
Yep. I'm going to take it one step further. I'm going to say one of the things that I've found is sometimes they don't need to be separate tables. Sometimes it's actually more valuable to not have to do that join, depending on scale and scope. I've got a table that has home street, home address 1, home address 2, etc., work address 1, etc., all in the same table. So I avoid that join.
And you can even take it further. You can have an embedded object. So that just writes the address right into the user object.
Yep.
So again, I guess I would flip this back on you, Paul, and say, why are you asking me that question? It sounds like you've done them both. And like you want to know what the right answer is. I don't know that there's a right answer. It depends on what you're doing.
Right. And a lot of people, when they come to the show, they're looking for like, hey, they're looking for validation. Like, hey, is this an okay way to go this path? A lot of the questions that I take via Twitter or Discord, they are questions like, have you ever seen this before? And that's all they want. Like, is what I'm doing okay?
Right.
Yeah. Right. It's hard to know all of the extra details, but yeah, there's a lot of patterns. There's a lot of ways to get to production.
Here's one. I'm going to pop this up. What can you tell us about the Spring Framework 6.05 version bug or issue when you have a space in the path component scan is not executed? Yes, I could tell you about that. Well, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So great question. We'll get to that in a little bit.
Awesome.
Cool. Let me see if I can go ahead and share some screens. And
we need like sound effects. Start dot calendar or calendar dot spring.io. We need something.
All right, so let's start as we do every week with the calendar. Something is missing from this week. I think everybody's off this week. Maybe that's no releases this week. So we did have again towards the we did talk about that on Tuesday, but towards the end of last week. So we had Spring Framework 6.0.6, Spring Boot 3.0.4. And this is including Spring Framework 6.0.6. So we're going to talk more about those. We'll take a look at the release notes and talk about why we're talking specifically about Spring Boot 3.0.4 this week. But that's it. From a calendar perspective, that's all I really have. Also, I want to talk about the golden path to Spring 1, which we'll talk more about in a little bit with our friend Aaron. But if you're not aware of this, this is a weekly, every Tuesday and Thursday. This is a show that is going to lead us up to Spring 1 at VMware Explore in August of this year. And these are sessions from the community talking about some really great subjects. So again, we have some coming up. We had Aaron on earlier. So you can catch that recording over on our YouTube channel. But we have some great talks coming up on test containers, on what's new in Spring Cloud AWS 3.0, the paved path to production on Kubernetes, and our friend Mark Heckler talking about Spring Cloud K8-based microservices. So a whole bunch of really great sessions coming up. Go ahead and check out the Golden Path to Spring 1. Next up, I want to talk about the Oracle event that is coming up later this month. This is the Oracle, I want to make sure I get the name right, Dev Live Level Up March 2023. So this is a few-day event that you can go to in person, or you can register for the digital event. Oracle is not asking us to sponsor this show or anything. I just thought I would point this out. Our friends at Oracle are holding this event. There's a whole day dedicated to Java Developer Day, Tuesday, March 21st. So if you want to focus in on cloud native or Java developer or data or MySQL, this is a really great event that you can go ahead and sign up for.
That's good. Can you post that link?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get that over here and post that right there. So that is one thing I wanted to talk about in the news. Another one is my friend Mark Sales tweeted out a little bit ago, I think last week or a week and a half ago. The AWS Lambda team launched a preview of the Java 17 base container image. This means that soon, right now it's just a preview, but soon we might be able to start using AWS Lambda in Spring with Java 17, which means we can start using Spring Boot 3 on AWS Lambda, which is exciting to me. So I'm excited about that. So that's all I really had in the news. We can come back to this in a second. I just want to see, is anything else going on over here?
Yeah, there's a couple of good questions. First, Andre says, when is your Udemy course going to be released?
Great question. I'll talk about this more on maybe a live stream next week, but I've decided not to release one. But I have some good news that I'll be able to share later on. But no new courses are going on Udemy, unfortunately. We'll talk more about that maybe next week.
All right. Out of curiosity, do you use Spring Java format for your home projects? I think that maybe that's for everybody. Simon's asking the audience participation question. Do you use Spring for your home projects? The answer here is a solid yes, absolutely. I am converting all of my stuff to Spring Boot, Spring CLI, native, running on ARM64, Raspberry Pi, RISC-V now, taking a stab at that. And yes, everything is Spring as much as possible. Everything is
I think he's talking about the Spring Java format project. So that
well, that was
I
way
haven't.
off.
No, you were not way off. You were very close. So that is a set of plugins that can be applied to any Java project to provide a consistent Spring style. I don't know that I've ever used this. Is this something that is baked into Spring, or this is from Spring IO? So I'm looking at.
It's a style, a format.
Let me know if this is what you're talking about, Simon.
Source formatting.
Source formatter.
Style format.
Check style.
Yeah. There you go.
So no, I have not used this, but I do like the idea of this, especially when you're in an organization and you're all checking in code somewhere. It's very good to have a common set of styles. Whatever tool that you're using, I think it's a good idea to, like, as a team, come to a conclusion on what things, you don't need to write entire style docs. Google, like with a good friend Aaron here, Google has a really good style doc on Java development. So you can have a Java development doc, you can have a Spring style doc, but whatever that answer is, yes, coming to some sort of, answer as a team of what that should look like. And if you're going to come to an answer, then you need to automate that somehow. So using tools like this is very useful. I actually never knew this existed till right now. So,
now that you mention it, I did know that it existed, and now I'm a little bit embarrassed. And I feel like maybe I need to go and implement this. Maybe I need to go and add these as part of my software supply chain to, reduce the deltas.
I probably would have been embarrassed like a year ago, but I've come to realize that there is just so much in this Java and Spring ecosystem. You cannot know it all. And I think we need to let everybody know that that's okay, because I think people come to Spring Office Hours and go, oh, I don't know that existed. I feel embarrassed now. Don't feel embarrassed. There's so much to learn. You just cannot know it all. You have to focus on the things that you need to focus on. And this may not be, DaShaun, you don't work in an organization right now that is checking in code that is conforming to some sort of format. So it makes sense that you wouldn't be using this.
Agree. How can I extract all source code from a jar if I'm in a situation where I only have the jar? That was a tough one. Have you ever had to extract source code from a jar file when you only had the binaries? You only had the bytecode. You didn't have the sources. Have you ever been down that path?
No.
There's a way to decompile bytecode, but what you lose is a lot of the language. So your variable names might be gone. You'll have string 1, string 2, string 3. So a lot of the context around what's actually happening, it takes a lot of time, but you can do it. You can decompile bytecode back into Java code. And I'm sorry if you're in that path, but if you haven't tried, if you're using something like Maven, you can actually download sources for a lot of projects. So if by chance it was in a Maven repository where you got the jar from, but the repository, the GitHub repository or the source forward repository is gone, you may still be able to get the sources jar from a central repository by downloading the sources. So give that a shot.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying, I agree. The IntelliJ decompiler is really good. So
yes. So you have,
you could probably decompile it and then ask ChatGPT to fix it up for you.
That's not a bad idea.
JD GUI tool is useful for such things. Simon saying the same thing.
Oh, look at this. JD GUI. I might have to take a look at that. See,
Fernflower from IntelliJ.
This is something that's been happening in the Spring Office Hours too a lot lately. We already saw it today, where our community is bringing questions, and the questions are being answered by our community. They're being answered in the chat before we even get to see them. So this is wonderful to see over the last few weeks.
Oh, this one's for you. Do you prefer JWT or Redis session for user authentication?
It depends. I like to use both. It depends on what you're trying to do. The one thing that you cannot do with JWT alone is log out. You can't Once you've issued a token, you can't decommission that token. So this is where
you can invalidate it though, right?
I can invalidate it. It's still out there.
Yep.
Right. So yeah, in a distributed system, that becomes tricky.
Yep.
So both. I'm going to say both. I like to start with Redis session, and then depending on what my needs are, I will usually add on JWTs.
Can you please talk about caching in your next videos? What specifically do you want to know about caching? So I would kind of flip that back to you and ask, what are your questions? What problems are you facing? Let me know.
Yeah, like that's probably one that I should have in my back pocket, is like, let's look at how valuable caching can be in a simple use case, how to bring it up, the at caching or cacheable annotation, and how much of a performance gain you can get by putting Redis in front of something. For example, not just Redis, others as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great idea.
Great question. Would you recommend migrating from Spring Framework 5 to Spring Boot? So you're using Spring without Spring Boot. So the real question would be, why are you asking about this? What are you trying to move to, like the next version of Spring? So like, hey, I want to move to Spring 6, so I might as well move to Spring Boot 3. Then obviously yes, but I would not migrate just to migrate. If there are reasons to migrate, then absolutely. I'm not a big fan of just migrating to the next thing. You have to have a real reason and a business use case, especially if you go to the higher ups. You can't just go to the higher ups and say, yeah, I want to switch from Spring Framework to Spring Boot. And the first question you're going to get is why? Why do you want to do that? You need to come back with ammo. Like, it's going to save us money. We're going to get performance benefits. You need to have some reasons why.
And you want to know what surprises me? And it shouldn't. Every time I hear an organization say, oh, end of life, end of support, that's not an issue. If it still works, it works.
Yeah.
But if something is about to run out of support and you're not on the latest and greatest, your climb is going to be much worse.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of staying current. That's why I like this show. I want to stay current as much as possible. I want to understand what's coming from upstream, and I want to be able to consume, so that I can not only just consume the latest and greatest and I can get the latest patches, but I want to be able to give my feedback.
Right.
That's a big part of what we need to do.
Always running into issues, upgrading libs, etc. Yeah. I mean, the longer you prolong this, though, the harder that's going to be too. So the longer you're sitting there, like, it's just going to get harder.
Yeah. And another benefit of Spring Boot is the POM, the dependency management part, right? If I'm not outside of the release train, my dependencies are taken care of, right? That's another big value add on the Spring Boot side.
Yep. I use Hazelcast caching.
I won't hold it against you. Like, Hazelcast is awesome too. It depends on what you're doing.
Spring Boot caching, Redis, etc. Right? False. I'd get the question, what does that mean? Yes, you have to come armed with some ammo, some context as to why you're doing that.
Solitary Turian, like, I'm already a fan.
Talk of extracting source code. What about obfuscating and anti-decompiling methods? Oh, I don't know. I don't know that you'll ever stop everything. The hackers, the crackers, like, they're gonna get, if they want to get to it, they can get to it.
Native compilation. I'm just throwing it out there. If you're worried about passing out a library or sending something out and having it decompiled for whatever reason, a native image, much more difficult to decompile. But Dan had a question up here that I don't want to miss. I've kind of been holding off on it. Can I use Spring Cloud Gateway to do MTLS? We have a notify microservice written in Node.js that uses it. So help me out, Dan. I want you to rephrase that. Help me understand the picture a little bit better. Is Spring Cloud Gateway sitting in front of your notify microservice? Is the notify microservice requiring MTLS? Help me out there. And again, Dan, I'm going to use you as an example. Dan is somebody that I've been lucky enough to have an offline conversation. When I have time, I'm happy to jump onto a Zoom or other and dig in deeper. So ask your questions. There's not a question that's bad to ask. Ask all your questions. If we can't cover it here on the show, we are happy to take it offline. We want you to be unstuck.
Awesome. Okay. I'm going to get over to my screen again. I want to talk about this before we get so many questions that we just forget about it. So I'm going to actually jump over here. So this was on March 3rd. This blog post came out. Spring Boot 3.0.4 is now available. The release was earlier than originally scheduled because of a regression found in Spring Framework. So this is included in Spring Framework 6.0.6. If you want to look at this blog post, I'm going to go ahead and throw this in the chat.
Thank you.
You want to go ahead and click on that because you can go through and click through to the regression and read through this and understand what was happening. So I just want to talk about this at a high level. I'm not going to go through every single one of these comments here, but there was a path matching resource pattern resolver that can no longer handle paths containing spaces and special characters. So when the Spring application is in a directory that contains a space, it skips probably all component scan-based bean creations. So if you had a configuration class and you had bean definitions in that configuration class, it was not picking them up. I started seeing this online. I started seeing some tweets about this, going, what is going on here? I thought first it was just a Windows specific thing, but it's not. It does not care about your OS. But if you had a directory with a space in it, it was throwing some errors there. It also skips REST controller as well. So if you have REST controller with endpoints defined in them, there was, that wasn't getting picked up as well. So pretty big regression. There's a bunch of comments in here that talks through it and what was going on. And good thing is that this is now fixed. So if you're on Spring Boot 3.0.3, you'll see this error. If you want to fix it, quick way to do it, move up to 3.0.4. So 3.0.4 includes that regression as well as a whole bunch of other things. Anything on that, DaShaun? Have you heard anything about that regression?
No, I'm just thinking of a couple of demos where, whoops, I wonder if I was running into this and I didn't realize it. So
yeah,
this is great.
Yeah, this is again why you should stay tuned to this show, the Spring.io blog. I kind of watch all of the main repos on here because it is hard to keep up with some of this. And like when it's a big project like Spring and that has been around for 20 years, when you start a new project and something breaks, don't immediately think this is my fault. Like there may be something wrong. But with bigger projects like this, there's a way to find that out quickly. If it's some small project that was released 2 weeks ago, sometimes it's harder to get those answers. But don't always think it's your fault. It's not always your fault. Sometimes it's our fault. And this one was our fault. So also, we had some bug fixes in here. So one of which that caught my eye was this configuration properties with initialized nested record properties values were no longer binding. So again, each of these have an issue number. You can go through, and if you think like, oh yeah, maybe that was affecting me, go through, read the issue, see how it was reported and what kind of project it was reported, and figure that out so you can get an idea of what was happening there. And then I think so we have graceful shutdown. We had a config data loader, something to do with observability and configuration. And then some documentation was updated. We upgraded some dependencies for like Jetty, Spring Data, Spring Framework 606, and Spring Kafka. So that was Spring Boot 3.0.4. And again, that builds on Spring Framework 6.0.6. If you're curious what happened in that, you can click on this and go see the fixes and documentation fixes. So there are some new features here. support for app value for record injection. Oh, I didn't even know this one existed. Let's take a look at this. So add app value support for record injection by disabling populate bean for records since records are immutable. Nice. I like that. So that'll be handy. And then nothing else that jumps out to me. Obviously, some bug fixes, some documentation. So I guess that's really what I wanted to cover was that big regression in 3.0.3. If you have questions about that, let us know. But yeah.
I have an out-of-the-box question. Why most Java champions are moving to Jakarta EE? It's a choice.
Well, when you say most, I have not seen the poll. So,
if
but again,
people are making the move.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with Jakarta EE. Fantastic project. We use it in Spring. Go ahead and take a look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. Yeah. 99% of the time, it is your fault. Yes, I popped that one up there.
I like that.
Even when it's like the cloud, like, hey, my Azure portal didn't load up. Like, what did I do? What did I break? Yeah, I still have that, whatever it is, that fear. What did I do? It was my little app that caused, Azure or AWS East to fall over. Yeah, this is a good question. Is there anywhere a roadmap for Spring Boot 3.1? Yeah.
So 3.1's already released. The first milestone of 3.1 has been released. So
calendar.spring.io.
Yeah, I'm looking at March on the 23rd. Milestone 2 is going to be released. And so if you click on that and you go to like the closed issues, you'll see what's been worked on in that milestone. So yeah, I don't know if there's like a wiki or anything out there that says, here's exactly what we've outlined for 3.1. I think that really comes together as we get closer to a general release and then we start working on the release notes. But you can always look through the issues being closed and get an idea of what's being worked on there.
So good. Yep. Nishant says, how would you compare Spring Boot to other frameworks when it comes to selecting the right one for microservices containers? Well, one of the things that I like about Spring Boot is I can build my containers with Spring Boot. I get the Maven plugin included. I get the Gradle plugin included, so I can build my images. Now I can build native images. So depending on my workload, depending on what I'm doing, I kind of get the best of both worlds. I can have a high performance JVM running my workload, or I can do the native compilation. So Spring Boot kind of covers a lot of the bases that I want covered. Plus the Spring ecosystem is massive, but that's why I'm here. I'm biased. That might be a question to ask outside of here. I am very, very biased. Spring ecosystem, the Spring community made drastic changes for me in my career and my happiness and my path of production. So yeah, I'm very, very biased.
And again, microservices, one of the benefits of microservices is that you can be polyglot, right? Yep. So you could be in an environment where one microservice is written in Spring and another one's written in Node and another one's written in Python. So that's really one of the benefits of it. So
yeah. Hey, is REST template already deprecated?
No. We've talked about this many times. So if you go to the API docs for REST template, it simply says that no future work will be done on the REST template. That does not mean it's deprecated. It just means we aren't working on it anymore because we are working on web client and HTTP interfaces in Spring Framework 6, which uses web client underneath the hood. REST template is still, well, before Spring Framework 6 was still my go-to for anything in the Spring MVC world, in the blocking world. I would just reach for REST template. No need to pull in another dependency if you don't need to, if you can use REST template. Now, the API is always a little bit confusing to me in REST template. Like, which method do I call? Like, there's all these different overloads. And so other than that, no, REST template works great and it is not deprecated.
I can honestly say it's been months since I've used REST template. I can honestly say it's been months since I've used anything other than the interface for creating my clients. And
Yep.
it's been awesome. I am having so much fun declaring my clients that way. And yeah, I've got multiple projects that are following that same pattern.
Yep. And you're using web client underneath the hood for that.
Yes.
What else we got?
Is Spring Webflux still working? Of course.
Absolutely.
Yes, it's amazing. If you haven't tried it, now's your time. You should try it.
Yeah, let's not forget that Project Loom is coming, but Project Loom is not here yet. We are not at Project Loom, so we are not using this in production yet. So virtual threads are not an option if you're in production right now today. So Spring Webflux should be something that you reach for if you're looking for those performance gains, those scalability gains. Webflux is a great option. Also, if you are doing something like reactive streams, that's your option right now. That's what you need to reach for, at least in the Spring world. Like, reach for Spring Webflux. When Project Loom rolls around and we have it as part of the JDK, stable, and we are using it in Spring, there's still a story to be made for Spring Webflux. Again, if you're using reactive streams and you're interested, you like the programming model that Webflux provides, it's still an option. So yes, going forward, there are still two paths.
There is a question here from DaShaun, like, hey, with reference to my earlier question, how can I try to reduce Spring Boot microservices spin up time when container auto scales my service? We have a couple of options. First of all, we have the native image. Then we've got crack. We have I forget what the letters stand for, but we have options for improving the startup time. You have the other option of increasing the value or increasing your JVM version. If you just move your workloads to Java 17, you're going to see a ton of improvement. But the native image startup time for Spring Boot applications is sub-second. So if that's your main concern, yes, your questions have been answered. Spring Boot with native images can handle that really fast startup time. So I would like to know more about your workload. What's your use case? Because yeah, I think we have an answer for you. Good question.
I saw a question. Oh, sorry.
Hey, thank you. Yep, answered that one.
No, sorry, this one. I heard a rumor they were considering adding a web client-like alternative to REST template, but I don't think that's technically deprecated. Very true. So there is like something being worked on, but I don't know, if it's going to make it, what the answer is yet. But yes, I've heard that same rumor. I've heard exactly what you have, nothing more. So
excellent. Modules.
So I just saw a video on this the other day. Who did this video? Oh, Sebastian. I'm forgetting your last name, Sebastian. Really great YouTuber who did a video on this the other day. Had a really great answer to this question, and I 100% agree with them. If all you're doing is deploying a single artifact, like this is the thing. So I have a jar file, war file, whatever, a native image. This is a single artifact. Probably not going to gain anything from using Java modules. Java modules are great for other projects, for framework providers. I have still never used Java modules. And to be fair, I got interviewed by, I will not name the company, and they basically really were down on the fact that I didn't know anything about modules. And I'm just like, why would I know anything about Java modules? I don't use them. So, but that's my answer. Yeah, if you don't, I forget what the question is already. Do you use modules? So no, I don't.
Was it Sebastian Dashner? Yes,
Sebastian is awesome. Love Sebastian. Sorry, I forgot his name. Yes, great content for sure.
Awesome. Let's see. Have you had a problem with R2DBC connection string to Postgres database in application YAML when deploying app service and database with Docker Compose? No, I have not had that problem. I have not had that problem at all. If you,
I'm not either because I don't do it.
If you'd like to share your repository info, if you can, shoot us a message. Happy to take a look at it offline. But that is not something that I've ran into a problem with. So I'm sure we could help or find you a good example to go from.
Cool.
What other problems are you running into right now? What are you stuck with? What have you been spinning your wheels on? Bring those questions here. Bring your questions. If you don't bring your question, it's not our fault. Just like dinner. If you leave the table and you're still hungry, that's your fault. If you leave here without asking your question, that's your fault. Bring your questions. All right, here he goes. Workload. My apps are going to get in festivals like Holy will be 100,000 concurrent users with each user hitting around 5 to 10 requests. So spin up time I expect is around 5. Yeah, you're covered. You are covered here. Happy to say that you're covered. DaShaun has mentioned an idea he calls scale to zero on your local machine during development. Is there a guide for doing something like that? Man, wouldn't it be nice if there was a guide? I should probably come up with a guide. What I do locally is I run Kubernetes locally. I run Knative serving on top of Kubernetes locally so that I can have my images, my native images. I can pass those around to my development team. I can consume those on my laptop. I can have hundreds of them deployed on my little one box. Sorry about that. On my little one box. And when I'm not using them, they are scaled to zero. So in my role, I have dozens of demos that I can pull up and run at any time. But I'm not using them all the time. So that idea of scaling to zero is super valuable. But that you bring up a good question. I should give a demo or something around how to do that and what it looks like on my machine and some of the benefits you can get. Hello. That's good. I need to write that
down. Yeah. Oh, so we should mention that we are like a month out. We will both be at DevNexus in Atlanta. I just finally got my hotel and my plane booked today.
Thanks for the reminder.
I have been putting that off mostly because I was trying to get the correct room block from the hotel that we're all supposed to be staying at. And I was procrastinating. So
I get it.
But I'm looking forward to DevNexus. We're going to have a booth there. DaShaun and I will be hanging around the booth.
And the demos are going to be so amazing.
We happen to know some people that are working on some demos for this booth.
The demos are going to be amazing. And I think maybe this community, the Spring Office Hours community, maybe they should get to see those demos before everybody else.
Maybe. Yeah, we could probably make that happen. So yeah, if you're going to be at DevNexus, stop by the booth, stop by our talks, come check us out. We're even working on maybe a Spring Office Hours live at DevNexus. So
that would be so much
fun. James, we were just in Canada in February? Well, about a year ago. We were in Toronto for a few days for a Spring One tour. Hopefully we can get back there soon because Toronto was awesome. I love Toronto.
Do developer advocates procrastinate?
Yes, very much so. I don't know about dev advocates, but I do.
This is a good question. Do you have your pipelines, for example, Go CD, configured to create and deploy boot native images to the server? I would definitely try to read more, but a heads up would be appreciated. Dan, you were doing native image pipelines last week, right?
Yeah. I was just working on an example for GitHub Actions. So I love GitHub Actions, but if there's not if there's not one answer, there's like many answers. And so you go looking around and you find all these different like actions and you try to piecemeal together something that works. Finally, DaShaun reached out to me and someone from the GraalVM team reached out to me. There is a GraalVM action that will do this. And what I like about the GraalVM action is that you can include a report too. So at the end of the native image compilation, it will spit out a report that says like, this is how much memory you saved. This is how much like execution time you saved. Really cool stuff. So yes, you can do this. What I haven't figured out yet is putting that together with what DaShaun does and saying, hey, with this type of machine, I want to build this type of image. So I could see in the case of something I want to demo off tomorrow, I may have people using Windows. I may have people using ARM64. I may have people using Intel based. And I want to build the latest image of each of those so that they can just come to, the repo or somewhere else and just download that native image. So I haven't put everything together yet, but yes, definitely possible. And that's been fun working on. So
yeah, I have a little thing here. I think I can show. But yeah, I've got a project that we've shown here, an example repository where I have placed, some native image code and some native image testing, and I'll show you kind of what it looks like as an example. This is just kind of an outline. One of the things that I've done, I'm going to add this, is in a single repo, I actually send pipelines. It'll trigger both. It'll trigger a Circle CI workflow that delivers ARM64, and it'll also trigger a GitHub workflow that does it for x86. So from the same repository, I've got workflow examples for both architectures, both CPU architectures. And this comes from the multi-architecture build pack that I've talked about many, many times. But the idea is I can use that same build pack on both of these platforms, and then I can get an image for both versions. And then I'm actually creating a manifest that combines those two images into a single multi-architecture container, so that when I deliver that user service out to the world, it's got native images for both ARM64 and for AMD64.
Yeah, so I think I looked at that. That's really interesting. But what if you don't want to use a container? So I think that was my use cases. I don't want to put it in a container. I just want the native image itself.
Yep. So that's a great question. What I'm doing for that is those same, and this is what I'm trying to do right now, is take that same Circle CI workflow, and it's generating that artifact. I want that artifact published to my releases under that release version back on my GitHub releases.
That's interesting. So that's cool.
We'll
Here, I'll show you the one that I had too. So when that completed, I basically get this report from GraalVM that says, here's a native image build report. Here's the environment. Here's the analysis. Talked about what was reachable, what was using reflection. Really cool. Here's the image details. Here's the resource usage.
Can you show us that action or give us a link to that action?
Yeah, let's take a look.
That is really cool.
And again, it was just something that the GraalVM team showed me. Pretty simple.
Did I see Simon as a committer? You got a PR from Simon? That's so much fun.
Yeah, Simon.
I'm such a big fan of this community.
We were doing this dad joke CLI using Spring Shell in the live coding last week, and he threw a PR in there for me. So yeah, not much to this. Run Spring Native Graal. It uses GraalVM. Then you tell it the version. So in this case, the version is 22.3.0. You have a GitHub token. And then all this does is run MVM native compile. But you also get this native image job report.
So I am using that same
and then it puts that out.
Action. I haven't used that reports. Well done. Thank you for sharing.
Pretty interesting. Yeah, I like it a lot. Cool.
Yeah. What are this? Yes. Wow. Beautiful. Good stuff. Search engine. Wait. Hello, Legends. What are your tech recommendations for implementing a search engine that searches inside databases of multiple microservices? Well, you're bringing up something that I've actually tackled with customers. This is a really, really good use case. There's many ways to slice it. It depends on your needs, your budgets, all that kind of stuff. But this is something that I've actually tackled, and it makes for another one. I tend to start with Redis because Redis is kind of like the Swiss Army knife, and I can do a lot of things with it. Redis search is something that I can ingest multiple databases. I can ingest that data, and I can do a search across it in real time. So that's my off the top recommendation. But that's a good question. It's a great use case. I would like to know more, and I would like to help. So
yeah, we've used Elasticsearch in the past for that as well. That's another, again, depending on your budget. So
yep. And here's another good question. This is what I brought up before. I'm currently doing subdomain routing for my Spring Web app by just using the HTTP request servlet, server name split 0. Is there a better way to do that?
I don't.
It works. It works, right? The better way is, some filter that's going to filter on something else, the context path, etc. This works. And I've mentioned it before. A lot of times it's just, is this a pattern that we've seen before? Yes, it does work. Are you going to run into limitations at some point? Yes, because you're going to start wanting to have different matching on the different parts of that URL. But for now, it works. Keep going. Thomas, you're doing great. Copilot CLI. It is in technical preview at the moment. Copilot likes stuff to help you on the terminal. What?
So I'd be curious to know what that's used for. So like, is it, hey, I just forgot a command or something? Because most of what Copilot is good at is inside of your code saying, giving it some feedback and giving it the context of your code saying, how do I write this method inside of this controller to do this thing? So no, I have not seen that on the CLI, but everything is AI these days, so I'm not surprised.
Yes.
And if you weren't, if you didn't know, so your ChatGPT is built by OpenAI. OpenAI, if you ask it a coding question and you get some code back, that is using something called Codex, which is OpenAI. GitHub Copilot is using Codex. So a lot of things seem to be funneling through OpenAI right now.
This is so the level of questions that we have today is interesting. I just feel like we've kind of changed. Our audience that's coming into the show is asking a different level of questions. This is great. I love it. So there's a question here, where was it? I just had it. What would you suggest is a requirement for getting into Docker for deployment? Docker is a great start, right? Yes, we've all heard of Kubernetes, or a lot of us have heard of Kubernetes by now. A lot of us can even spell Kubernetes, but it's not always where you need to go. Docker Compose, what we heard about earlier, are great options. And Docker Desktop is a great tool. I'd say start there, play with it. Maven, Spring Boot, build image is your next step. That's it. It's really not that complicated. If you can get that container versus container runtime concept, you're good.
Yeah, no, I think I'll just slim it down a little bit for you too. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is get our applications into production, right? So if you have a host that has a JVM, then you can just produce a jar and send it off to them, right? What about the environments where there's not a JVM, right? So if there's not a JVM, this is where Docker comes in really well, because a Docker container can virtually be run anywhere. So if you're looking at a host and they don't have support for JVM, but they support Docker, guess what? You can build a Docker image right out of your application in Spring Boot and ship it off to that host. So ultimately, these are all tools to get us into production.
Awesome. Great questions. What is GraalVM? I think we're going to have to come back to that one. This is that piece that allows us to do the ahead of time compilation, but we should definitely do something special. I think I have some content just for you, James. Hello. Why not install database agents in all microservices and have them push the database logs to Elk Stack? This is also valid. Change data capture is a thing. Anytime something gets written to any one of those databases, you write that log, you capture what got written to the database, and you send it over to Redis. That's how I was doing that pattern of searching across all the databases. You can absolutely do that. Somebody that have you in the terminal around the Copilot. Good.
Funny, I actually wrote a CLI to do just that. It's called WTF GPT.
WTF GPT. Yep. Would you prefer Redis or geodesic key value DB? I use them both a lot. It really depends on what else I'm doing, but both good options. Try them. Here's the thing. Ask somebody else on what they prefer is never as good as deploy it against both and do your own test. That's always going to win. And now we're talking about containers. You can stand up a test container. You can run a performance test, a load test, a validation integration test. You can run all these tests against your test containers, and you can decide pretty easily which is the better one for your use case. That's my recommendation. Context for search engine, microservices that stores social media posts, reposts, comments, etc. Microservices that stores users of social media. It's internship project, so budget is not really high. Yeah. Start with Redis. Use CDC across your different microservices, pull them all onto Redis, and search across there. Yes, a database of databases. Yes, absolutely. Oh man, these are good stuff. Oh, here we go. I've written an auto configure and a couple of starters for my org. I've used Spring Boot 3.2 in the auto configure, wondering what's the best practice with versioning. How may I upgrade the project? This is a good question. This is a really mature question. Hey, I'm building things. How do I make sure that my auto configure project, my starters are aligned with upstream? How do you decide your release train that you're going to be compatible with? That's a good question, and there's 100 ways to do it. I don't have a good answer for you, but documenting somewhere, having something like an internal developer portal where you can document this starter is validated against these versions, that might be the easiest place to start. I'm just throwing it out there, but that is a really mature question. And if you come up with something on how do I make my little starter? How do I announce that this is the starter for Spring Boot 3 versus Spring Boot 2 in the naming version? I think that's what you're looking for. I've looked for that too, and I have no way of doing it. I've struggled. Even on the multi-architecture build pack, trying to figure out how to do versions. It's difficult. Like, these things aren't trivial, and it means a lot to a lot of people. Yes. I've not heard of Eclipse Tamarin. Have you? I might have to ask you more questions about that.
Eclipse.
We'll see.
I thought Tamarin was just a version of Eclipse. Like, hey, I'm using like the Spring Eclipse version or whatever. I think it's just a version.
Okay.
So yeah, the ID, whatever ID you're using, does not matter. But let me double check that before I put my foot in my mouth.
Okay. Another question. Hi, where is SQL standing in a Java developer's life? You write too much SQL codes like procedures in PL/SQL? It depends. There was definitely times in my Java developer life where I was writing tons of SQL. And then there's definitely times where I'm not. And my annotations or my framework is handling those things for me. It depends. But it's a good question. I want to know, are you spending a lot of time writing SQL?
It seems to be a lost art these days. So you should definitely keep that in your back pocket if you've got it.
All right. We have had a lot of questions.
So I'm sorry, the Eclipse Tamarin Open JDK, it's a version of the JDK.
Okay.
I don't know. So if you are building a native image, you need to be using the GraalVM you need to be using the GraalVM JDK. So specifically like 22.3.0 or something. But again, that's just building. So if you're building your application, and then you don't need to build a native image, right? You can ship it off to CI/CD, and that can do that for you.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So clearing that up, these are good questions today. And there's a few things that now I think we need to do a reset and answer some of these questions. They're really good questions. Lots of good questions. So I'm going to bring some of these questions up onto the screen. We are running out of time, but I pulled the questions up, even though we might not get to them today. I pull them up so that we have them on the video because we don't want to lose them. So thank you. Thanks, everybody. We're wrapping up. I want to get some of these up here just so we can.
Yeah, let me get to this. Looking ahead to Loom and virtual threads versus Webflux, I guess that the servlet engines as Tomcat need to re-implement their dispatcher core stuff. So this work has already been done. So Tomcat, the database vendors need to do some things, right, for blocking. So this has already been done. You can go ahead and test drive this in Spring Boot 3 now with Java 19 enable preview flag on. So yes, there's not much code change for you in a Spring Boot app. There are some configurations that you'll need to do to say like, hey, I'm using these new techniques, right? Like the new like Tomcat and database vendors. So there'll be some config you have to change there, but yeah, this is mostly on different vendors.
Quick answer, James. You can do it. Redis is faster, and it depends on your scale. It can be orders of magnitude faster. Naming is hard. Yes. JDK. Different versions. OpenJDK is going to be including the native image processing real soon. I think I heard later this month where the new versions of the OpenJDK will include the native image. So we'll have more options for building our native images. I'd be very interested in doing a POC. Yes. We'll take that offline. There's tons of them out there for you to take a look at. Yes. With OpenAPI, how do you validate that when your change contract it is backward compatible or if it's changed, but only in intended operations? That's a great question. And this question specifically is why I lean into Spring REST docs. I do test-driven documentation, the other TDD. And we've done a few sessions on that. But this is one of those questions, like how do you know? How do you validate it? With Spring REST docs, my documentation is built from my tests. So if my tests are passing, the test output is generating the documentation. The documentation gets delivered with my release. So my documentation is always in sync with my tests and my tests with the code. So that's something for you to take, like Spring REST docs. Yes. Oh man, so many questions. I don't even think I can get all these. There are so many questions, and we are just running out of time. So we're gonna have to like circle back.
Did you bring this one up yet? Any reading recommendations on GraphQL and Spring? So the documentation, obviously, check out spring.io, the Spring for GraphQL documentation there. I would check that out. GraphQL Java. So that is the project that Spring for GraphQL builds upon. So check out the documentation there. That's a really good place to learn. And then GraphQL.org. So just GraphQL in general. GraphQL.org has a bunch of very good like introductory documentation. Other than that, there are books and courses and stuff, but those are like 3 good places to start.
Arthur, check out my blog, DaShaun.com. I do have a release that allows you to do native images on ARM64, including the M1. DaShaun/builder:tiny. Take a look at that. But yeah, DaShaun.com. There's a lot of information and the history and the story. What else? Please do more streams. The community wants more streams. I get it. We're working on it. But Dan is super busy.
We are streaming a lot, just in different channels.
We'll get there. But make sure you subscribe. Dan Vega, at Dan Vega on YouTube, at DaShaun on YouTube, at Coffee Software on YouTube. Subscribe. There's lots of content. Let's see. And yeah, I feel pretty good. This has been great. Thank you, everybody, for the great questions. I really feel like people are getting unstuck. I feel like we're helping out here, Dan. I feel like
I do too. Yeah, that was great. And we have some exciting topics in the next couple of weeks. I don't want to leak them out yet because we are confirming next week's potential guest. So stick around for that. But yeah, we have some exciting things coming up. So looking forward to it.
In the word of Josh, good stuff.
Good stuff.
Wonderful.
All right. I think that's where we'll end today. Join us again next week on Tuesday, 3:30 Eastern for Spring Office Hours. We'll see you then. And with that, have a good one, everyone.
Take care. Bye.